Let's talk about what happens when attachment has been disrupted. And a segue into that will be to give you some ideas about the kind of things that disrupt attachment that we oftentimes aren't always really conscious of. And one of those things is experiencing a lot of stress when you're pregnant by depression, domestic violence, car accidents, a separation of a marriage, a death of a parent, any number, becoming sick as the mother, becoming sick. All of those things generate a lot more stress, which can also set up the potential for both your child and for yourself to have some attachment and bonding challenges. And I like to look at them as challenges more than I do disorders or impairments or anything like that. Outside of pregnancy, all those things can naturally take into place. One thing that we oftentimes aren't really conscious of also is just our own parenting. What our own experiences were as children growing up. Maybe we were traumatized. Maybe we were abused. Maybe we were abandoned or in foster care or adopted or had depressed parents or had alcoholic parents. You know, any number of those things can make it more challenging for us to soothe in relationship. And when attachment has been disrupted, which really, again, I want to reinforce, it's not just about attachment, even more than attachment. It's about oxytocin, which is the anti-stress, having a relationship that's rich in oxytocin. It's about regulation, being able to be calmed in the midst of stress. And then it's about attachment, because those things make attachment possible. And it's about your ability to be regulated, your ability to be calmed as a parent, whether it's the mother or whether it's the father. Because fathers play a very important role. In fact, I say that the most important role of the father is to make mom feel like a goddess and to treat her as such, because that helps her to feel calm. And when she can feel calm, then the baby can feel calm, which creates a very optimal environment. So your ability to be calm makes it possible for you to be able to bond. And once negative, stressful things, trauma is any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, or unpredictable. Any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, or unpredictable. And the reality is that we experience lots of traumas all the time. But the brain and body system, the body-mind, has an ability to heal itself when we have supportive relationships and supportive environments. When you see a really scary accident on the highway, one of the first things you do is you pick up the cell phone and you start telling somebody about it. Well, that's your brain and body system, your body-mind system, trying to work through the potential trauma. So there are a lot of traumatic experiences that happen, but that doesn't mean you're going to be impaired or challenged for the rest of your life. We process them naturally, but when traumas do occur, really stressful events occur, and we don't have opportunities to have someone support us, to understand, to process, to express through the event or the experience, then that can be more long-lasting. Another area that we also don't oftentimes put enough focus on is the birth experience itself. There are so many pregnancies that end in really traumatic births. And those are very stressful experiences for the babies. A lot of times, because the birth may be traumatic, the baby gets taken away to surgery or taken away to an incubator. But the critical piece there is that they're separated from you. They don't have an opportunity to get that oxytocin-rich environment right from the first. And so there can be a lot of trauma that happens during birth. You know, the baby gets stuck in the birth canal, the umbilical cord wrapped around the neck, or they're turned wrong side up. All kinds of experiences. What's important about that is that you can help your baby heal through those experiences. One of the first ways of doing that is getting that baby to you skin to skin just as soon as you can. And then also allowing yourself to breathe in and cry through that experience. That's a grief-generating experience. When you've had all of these hopes and all of these dreams about how the pregnancy is going to go, and then all of a sudden it becomes traumatic. Well, that's a loss. There's a lot of sadness that gets generated there. Well, your baby feels that same sadness. Put your baby skin to skin and allow yourself to cry. Allow yourself to grieve, because crying is not bad. Crying, the chemical makeup of a tear is the same as stress. So when a tear is coming out of you, it is releasing stress. And so it becomes very important. And to allow that grieving to occur is very healing for both you and your infant. The other way you help work your baby through a birth trauma is by talking to him or her. Holding them in your arms, while you're nursing or while you're feeding, and just saying, when you were coming out of mommy's tummy, it was really hard. Mommy got really scary, because it's not so much the words that make sense to your baby. It's the energy, it's the emotion you generate. And you generate that emotion and you generate that energy. Your baby receives it and can actually process through the experience, because your baby experienced it too. And you can help them to heal it non-verbally, just by talking to them and allowing yourself to cry. And you may notice that when you cry, your baby starts to cry. Well, that tells you, one, how connected you are, but two, that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. That means healing is happening. Because as you're crying and your baby's crying, you can soothe them. And the two of you can cry together and everything's going to be okay. See, it's when we cry and we have no one to support and to be comfort to us that crying becomes really scary. That's why it's not okay for babies to cry by themselves, because the world's crying as far as a baby's concerned. The whole world is stressed as far as a baby's concerned. But when a baby is with the parent and they're crying, then they're having the stressful experience, but then they know mommy's right here or daddy's right here. Everything's going to be okay. I just got to get through this. And so you can talk to your baby, and you should. Talk to your baby if those really stressful experiences have happened. And you'll notice that a lot of times babies will continue to work through those traumatic experiences in their sleep. They'll wake up in the middle of the night crying or sobbing. My youngest child had a lot of early birth trauma. And so one of the things we've had to do with her from the very beginning is to talk to her, to tell her the story of her birth. And we don't tell her all well, there was lots of blood and people were cutting on you, and we don't tell her all of that. We just say it was really scary and it was really sad, and we were really sad that you couldn't be right with us immediately, but Daddy got right down there as soon as he could. And she wants to know. She's 5 now. She wants us to tell her that story over and over again. Well, the reason she wants us to tell it to her over and over is because that's how she makes sense of it. The more she can make sense of it consciously, the more she can settle it unconsciously in her body. And then she doesn't carry it forward with her. So really be open to talking to your baby. Really be open to crying through that process. If you feel those emotions, it's perfectly okay. It's perfectly healthy and normal. The other thing that you should really think about is postpartum depression. That is a natural process that occurs after giving birth. It doesn't happen in all situations, because a lot of times if you've had a really rich, oxytocin-rich pregnancy, then oxytocin helps offset the depression. But if for whatever reasons you haven't, it's natural, because your body has just experienced a loss. Even though you now have your baby, your body has experienced a loss. There's a part of you that's no longer a part of you. Now it's outside of you. So your body physiologically will go through a grieving process. And a grieving process is an attempt to repair. So your body constricts as it tries to repair, and then you become depressed. Well, what you need in that depression is you need support, you need comfort, you need lots of chocolate ice cream. Doesn't have to be chocolate. Dessert spelled backwards equals stressed. So lots of comfort food that trigger oxytocin for you. You need someone to hold you and let you know it's okay to cry. The same way you would do your baby. You can't hold your baby too much. You cannot spoil a baby. It's physiologically impossible. The only way we spoil our children is by material overindulgence. But you cannot spoil a baby by picking them up too much. You can't spoil them by holding them too much. It's physiologically impossible. All you're doing is making their system stronger and stronger and stronger. So that will bring me back to what happens when attachment has been disrupted. Well, when attachment is disrupted, it means that babies don't have someone to come and interrupt their stress. They don't have someone to come and turn on their oxytocin response. So then what happens is they're not able to learn how to calm themselves down. So they're easily stressed out. And when you're easily stressed out, you can become more aggressive. You become more defiant. And later, it leads to lying, stealing, hoarding food, being really whiny, always whiny, or clinging, being real clingy to you. So a child who has had disrupted attachment, meaning they haven't had ample opportunities for prolonged regulation, they haven't learned how to really release oxytocin and how to self-soothe, it generates into a lot of negative behaviors. And that's really what my area of specialization has been in, working with children who have really severe behaviors. And I have a little formula called the stress model, which says all behavior arises from a state of stress. In between the behavior and the stress is the presence of one of two primary emotions. There are only two primary emotions, love and fear. That's all there is. That's all there is. Everything else arises from one of those two states. So from this point forward, if your child is upset, if your child is acting out, if they're throwing a tantrum, if they're clinging on to you, or if they're hitting the other little kids at school, or being hit by some other little kid at school, or they're really defiant and they won't do what you ask them to do, first, they're stressed. Second, they're afraid. And third, they're having their behaviors. The best way to combat that is to breathe yourself, to have understanding that they're not doing it because they're being manipulative or defiant or controlling, or that they're willfully disobedient. That's the big one. They're not doing it for any of those reasons. They're doing it because first they're stressed, and second, the fear is generating their negative behaviors. So the first thing you can do is breathe, have understanding, see fear, and then operate towards your child from that perspective. You're really upset. I can see you feel really angry. You're really mad. And respond rather than react. And if you can do that, you can help to interrupt their stress. You interrupt their stress, you calm their fear. You calm their fear, you're diminishing their behaviors. Always try to come back to love in any given situation. Any given situation, you have a decision, you have a choice. You can continue to act out of fear, which is what we know in our society, what we've experienced, or you can choose love in any situation, in any moment. You can operate out of fear, which is already there, or you can choose love. And every time you choose love, you're choosing the moment. You're choosing something new. And that's all there is. That's all there is this moment. And every time you can give your child a moment of love, you're giving them something new.
I already have 2 children, and I'm expecting my third. And we have, a lot of us, been told that we should let our kids cry it out because it helps them to learn how to self-soothe. Why shouldn't we do that?
Well, that's an excellent question, first of all. And that is a very old teaching. It comes from many generations. And you almost answer the question within the question because you say it is teaching our children how to self-soothe. Children aren't taught how to self-soothe. They learn how to self-soothe through our teaching. And so we are the ones that teach them how to soothe. They don't learn it on their own. And the other piece of that is that they don't have the neurologic equipment, their brain is not neurologically equipped to soothe themselves. Their brains are equipped to exhaust themselves. So a lot of times we mistake their crying it out until they're quiet as them learning how to self-soothe, when it's not. They're learning how to self-exhaust, and they're learning how to respond when they've become exhausted. So it is your ability and your willingness and openness to go and soothe your children when they're stressed, because a cry is a state of stress. It's your ability to go and soothe them that's actually teaching them how to self-soothe. And so a child who has never been taught how to self-soothe through a parent doesn't learn it. They can learn all kinds of things to stop crying or stop hitting, but they're not learning the mechanisms internally. They're not learning how to regulate themselves.
Well, and then sometimes you hear that when you're frustrated as a parent and your child is crying and you're frustrated, that you should just stick them in a crib, close the door, and walk away. What should we not do that?
When you become frustrated as a parent, that's the big piece. Regardless of what's going on with your child, when you become frustrated, you've got to start breathing. That's the first thing. If you feel your anxiety and your stress really elevate, I always encourage having the parent say to the child, "Mommy's stressed, Daddy's stressed, I'm feeling frustrated, I need to take a little time out." You take the time out. In fact, that's the only time I teach time out, is when the parent needs to take the time out. Children don't need time out. Children need time in. Because if a child knew how to calm themselves, they wouldn't be acting the way they were acting.
You talked about not letting your kid cry it out. There's been times with him that in order to get him to kind of self-soothe, I will go in and pick him up and hold him. But I can do this for an hour straight, and as soon as I put him down on his back, he will continue to cry. So at that point, you talked about constantly picking up your child to let them calm themselves down. But I could do this routine for an hour, 2 hours sometimes. Do you have any suggestions on how to help him along, help him soothe better?
I think one of the things that we have to try to let go as much as possible is having to get your baby to have to learn something. See, learning is natural. It is a natural process. It's going to come automatically. It'll come different for some babies than it does other babies. But I would really encourage you to, when at all possible, take the time, you go in and lay down with them. Just lay there and be there with them, and you breathe. You calm and you breathe. And you don't even necessarily have to hold him to you, because he can get really used to that. But you can lay him beside you and get skin to skin, breathe, and just stroke him, talk to him, hum a song. And then once he falls asleep, then you can kind of move away. But you're helping him. You're teaching him how to soothe. So much more than him learning how to soothe himself. Now, you don't have to worry about him needing to learn how to soothe himself. As long as you're there teaching him, he's going to learn that automatically. So you don't have to get it taught. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I guess I feel as though I may be hindering his effect to do that on his own, because I'm constantly the person there having to reinforce that behavior.
You are the most important person in his life, and you're not reinforcing. See, that's another big one. We always think we're reinforcing negative behaviors. You're not reinforcing negative behavior. You're reinforcing the support of his regulatory system. When you go and soothe him, you're giving him everything that he's going to need to be able to soothe himself later when he has to. But if you don't do it at that early point, he's going to really struggle to do it later. And so you're every time you go and you soothe him, that's nothing but positive. There's no bad about that. And his crying isn't a negative thing. His crying is an expression. So you're not reinforcing the crying, you're reinforcing the soothing internally and in his brain and in his body. You're bringing him oxytocin. Every time he's crying, you're bringing him a dose of oxytocin, which is like bringing him a dose of being calm. That can't be bad. There's nothing bad about that. And another really, really common kind of mindset, traditional approach to parenting our children is that we got to get them to be independent as soon as we possibly can. That's actually not correct. It's not true, especially in regards to the brain. Actually, the more dependence you can foster with your child early, the more independent they become later. The more we try to push our children into independence, the less independent they become and the more dependent they become. And so the more you can actually foster dependence, and that it's okay for them to be held by you and to be loved by you and to be nurtured by you and all these things. And that I know it requires a lot of self-sacrifice. But the more you can do that now, the less they'll need it later. So that when they do turn 18 years old, they're ready to go off into the world, as opposed to you being freaked out because they're not ready. Well, that starts way back here as babies. So really try to combat that notion, because that has so much little to do, so much less to do with our babies and so much more to do with us. We want them to be independent so we can have more flexibility and more freedom. But we are constantly losing sight of, you're not going to get this time back. This is the only time they're going to be babies. When every day that goes by, you're not going to get that day back. And so this day matters more than any other day ever, because they're going to carry this day with them. So a day that goes by that they don't get it is just a day that goes by that they're not going to have it. And so really give as much as you possibly can, as much as you can, because you're just helping build their brains to be really strong and build their systems to be really strong.
So in your studies and research, have you found at what point is it, that I can actually stop having to constantly go in and soothe him? At what point, at what age do kids seem to find their way and figure it out and self-soothe?
Again, it varies from child to child. But the more you can give him early, the quicker he'll start to do it. So children, babies, go through developmental milestones. And see, a lot of times when your baby's getting ready to hit the next milestone, and this could even be your small child, when they're getting ready to hit the next milestone, they'll start crying more, they'll regress and be like more babies before a baby will or start to really walk. He'll go back, instead of crawling, he'll just be scooting around on the floor, and then we're like, oh my gosh, he's not crawling anymore, he's never going to walk. Well, no, he's regressing. We will take steps back in order to get ourselves strong enough, build ourselves up to propel us forward. And so he'll get there, but you just have to trust. And that's how fear plays out. Fear says, if I keep doing this, he's never going to learn it himself. And so then we try to push it and make it happen. Well, we're not allowing love to take its place.
Whenever you put your child on a schedule, how does that impact their lives?
Again, I think that so many of the things that we've been taught for early parenting of our children is less about them and more about us. And so a lot of times we schedule our babies in order to make it easier for our lives. And when you're operating on a schedule, the body-mind system doesn't operate on a schedule. The body-mind system operates on need. And so you essentially are permitting periods of time to go on, which can be stressful times when you don't have to. That's scheduling oftentimes goes back to, you don't want to spoil your child. You don't want to feed on demand, because then you're teaching them to be demanding. It's just not true. And so if it's possible to avoid scheduling, that's what I recommend, because it goes back to providing soothing, providing comfort, providing oxytocin when it's called for. And that's providing love. And love doesn't operate on a schedule. Love exists. And so, just try to keep in mind when you're going again, or you're going with tradition, just think, is this about me or is this about my baby? And if you can kind of tease those two apart, I think it'll make a big difference.
Also, talking about impacting lives, when a child sees their parents fighting or hears it, how does that make them, how does that impact their lives too?
It creates stress, first of all, because not only are they experiencing vibrationally the stress of the parents, but they're experiencing stress too. And then it also creates memories. See, memories get stored in the cellular systems of our bodies. So we're actually contributing to the imprints that are going on within their brains and their bodies that they'll carry forward with them. If a thought can change your vibration, if a thought can change your cells, think about how powerful actually seeing something physically is. And so it can have an impact. Yes?
I find that the toddler years are a lot more stressful than the baby years, not only for me as a parent, but also for the children. How do you combine the information you've told us to helping our children deal with the anger and at the same time consequences for bad choices or wrong choices that they make?
Those are excellent questions. And especially with toddlers, it's important to understand that the part of their brain responsible for clear thinking and calming stress isn't developed yet. And even at 3 years old, it's just now formed. So you've got a good another 2 years, a good another 24 months before they really can think about what it is they're doing. And so, especially with that age, like, I'm not big into consequences. I believe that consequences only create more stress and they only create more fear. And I'm big into taking responsibility as a parent. So if you have a child who's making bad choices, a toddler who's making bad choices, then we have to be more present as parents and pick them up more, be less verbal. That's really important with kids, is to be less verbal and more emotionally present. So you pick them up, or you just kind of move their hand away, or you say, we're not going to do that. And you really try to engage them that way. And then they can learn how to make good choices. Once their brains are really healthy and really formed, then good choice making only comes from being able to be regulated. See, stress, research tells us, stress causes confused and distorted thinking and suppresses the short-term memory. So if you've got an acting out child is a stressed out child. There's the first part of that question that you asked. I'm not sure that I answered. I think you said it was just more difficult with toddlers. And it's because they're more active, they're really taking in a lot more. Their brain at two is a rapid stage of it's a brain spurt at 2. And the only time the brain spurts that much is, again, when we're adolescents. And at adolescence, the brain spurt is the opposite. It actually is pruning down and shedding away everything it doesn't need. But those two of the most challenging stages in development of raising children are at 2s and teens. And it's because the brains are the most active during those 2 stages. And so really trying to be more present and be more mindful during those times, and keep in mind that your toddler is still so much closer to an infant than to a child. And if you can do that, remember to try to continue treating him more towards that, not goo goo gaga and babying him, but babying him. Like, he is still very sensitive, he's still growing, he's still developing, he still doesn't really understand.
Loving on them.
Still loving on him, absolutely. Loving on him a lot more than not.
I found that 4 was kind of a magic age with my other 2. You know, they learn to problem solve and figure things out more. And
Absolutely.
what about when you have a school-age child that might tend to be reactive and trouble dealing with their anger? Do you suggest, something I've done with one of mine is to have time alone before we talk about it, kind of to sort things out in his own mind. Do you have suggestions?
Well, again, we go back to looking at neurologic development. I mean, he's so much more emotionally oriented and energized than he is cognitively able to make sense out of his feelings. And so you can do this now at 5, but I like to start parents as infants. Your baby's crying. You say, oh, you're crying. You're upset. Mama's got you. I understand. Daddy hears you. You're mad. Now, affirming. And with a 5-year-old, you just start saying, you're really angry. Tell mommy how mad you are, because mommy hears you. I hear how mad you are. But we don't hit other people when we're mad. When we're mad, we express our anger, and you can express your anger as much as you need to. There are 3 pathways of emotional expression: attitudes, feelings, and behaviors. We start out with attitudes. If attitudes, rolling the eyes, huffing and puffing, if attitudes aren't an okay expression of emotions, we go to feelings. Rah, I'm mad, I'm angry, I hate you, da, 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 da. If feelings aren't an okay expression, or even crying, just, and a lot of men, you can't cry, especially boys. If feelings aren't an okay expression, we go to behaviors. Hitting, screaming, throwing things, kicking, spitting. Well, see, those behaviors are almost always not acceptable. So then we suppress behaviors. Well, what happens when you've suppressed attitudes, feelings, and behaviors? You're only left with 2 options: anger or depression. And so we really have to be more conscious of how we allow our children to express. Because we don't really want them in behaviors, but they may be in behaviors right now. Let them express those behaviors, but be encouraging them to use their words and their feelings. And you got a little boy who's kicking the wall. Say, you're really mad right now. Tell mommy how angry you are. Ugh, mad. See, a lot of times when you'll do that with a child, they'll stop kicking the wall. Because you give them permission and energy to release, as opposed to not having to kick.
I always tell my kids it's okay to be angry. It's just what you do with that anger and what actions that you.
We don't hit when we're angry.
Yes.
We can express our anger. You can be angry. It's okay to be angry. So when you're angry, use your words, use your feelings instead of your hands or your feet. And then you're teaching your children early, as babies, that they don't have to hit and kick and scream and be mad when they're angry. Because see, a child who grows up being permitted to, when they're angry, when they grow up being permitted to do that, when they get older and they're mad, guess what? They don't have to do it, because they have learned to have a voice. When you learn to have a voice, you don't have to use it unless you absolutely have to. But see, a lot of times when a child has grown up being heard, they don't have to scream anymore because they know how to use their voice effectively.
Thanks for watching this Post-Miracle Parenting segment brought to you by Miracle Industries. For more information, articles, and online chat with Dr. Bryan Post, just go to www.postmiracleparenting.com. Special thanks to Miracle Blanket, the gift of sleep. See for yourself why parents gave Miracle Blanket its name. Watch these home videos of babies going from crying to calm in just seconds. Then go to YouTube and watch many more like them. Millions say it's a miracle. Now you see why.